As mentioned, the concept for this presentation is very much about how to scale a startup. And with ours in particular, there happen to be a few implications about not just an app, but kind of a real world experience, which I'll get into in a second, but I hope it is entertaining, if not informative as well. First things first, a bit of context on myself. There's my LinkedIn if you want to kind of view my background, but essentially I've been quite fortunate to be in product basically from the start of my work years. I initially started with a new grad scheme, which is kind of one of those multiple door opportunities where I should have done 6-month rotations across a variety of departments. And instead I fell into digital really quickly at TELUS, which is a Canadian telco. I was there for about 5.5 years, really digging into product management, initially with a go-to-market focus and interfacing with a lot of different departments. But essentially, the digital team was kind of set up like its own labs function. And I know that that's kind of a cliche thing to say, that a big employer can get away with becoming lean and agile and being super collaborative, user-centric and stakeholder-driven, but we actually were. We were super empowered. And so any decision from redesigning a homepage through to a funnel entering e-commerce, we were able to do it very much with user feedback and validation with an MVP approach every step of the way. The only reason I left was because I wanted to relocate to London, and as a result, I ended up falling into Ticketmaster, which was a really phenomenal transition because not only was it still a large corporate setup with kind of an e-commerce angle, but it was in live entertainment, which is something I'd always had a passion in working for. And whether it was to do with theater, sports, or music gigs, there was that perfect kind of connection of similarity and transferable skills from my TELUS days through to Ticketmaster. But it was still a large organization, and so I wanted to challenge myself and join a much more kind of scrappy environment where I needed to be wearing multiple hats on any given day. And so as a result, being able to then join the Boiler Room team was pretty incredible. For anyone that's familiar, I won't ramble on too much about it, but for those that aren't, Boiler Room is a music platform where essentially they put on shows for underground talent in a variety of music genres, whether that's jazz or eclectic world stuff. House and techno is very much what they're known for on most YouTube clips, and a variety of kind of more trap, grime, hip hop genres. And the bulk of what they do is very much related to events, but also giving those events a live digital audience. There's both the live streaming component as well as on-demand consumption. So that's where you might have seen it come up on a YouTube recommendation or SoundCloud mix with maybe an hour's worth of footage of literally a performer in front of maybe a webcam in the early days, then became a much more fully fledged broadcast production. And from a digital standpoint, it meant that the website was kind of the comprehensive archive for all of that information. Again, I won't get into too many details there, but it was my perfect foundation in joining a company that had been established for a little while, but was still very much run as a startup with, a head of department being the title, but essentially you were as much a doer as you were a delegator to your team. We didn't have a junior product manager that I could delegate to or a scrum master or anything like that. And essentially developers were equally empowered to figure out how best to manage our, giant archive of media with, I think, 7 million hours worth of content now. It's pretty crazy stuff. So there was a lot that went into my experience there, which essentially, once you combine these 3 very different employment experiences across 2 countries, was the foundation for me joining ChargedUp. So this is a really old school graphic that I found from the archives, but essentially back when I joined, it was very much still a tiny London-based startup. There were less than 300 stations set up across the country for you to rent and return a power bank from. So that's kind of what this graphic is trying to convey, was the fact that in a very specific subset in central London, you'd be able to take the phone app, either on iOS or Android, scan a QR code in front of any of these stations and release a power bank. Like you can see there, it kind of looks like a piece of toast coming out of a toaster. And to return it, all you had to do was put the power bank back in, click it into place. Our systems would talk to each other and detect that you'd returned your rental, and therefore your rental had concluded, and you pay by the hour. So it's a very affordable way to stay charged on the go, especially if you're on a night out or on the weekend you forgot to charge your phone, or you ended up using it far more than you thought, perhaps live streaming a product school broadcast for yourself. So as a result, we really like the fact that we're actually solving a user need with technology. It's less about consuming consuming and purchasing something, and the amount of people that have a drawer with 3 power banks just sitting there gathering dust instead of having it already charged, ready to go for when desperate times strike. So I love that we actually solve a real world problem for users, and at the same time are building a venue ecosystem with a lot of bars, coffee shops, restaurants, shopping centers now getting in on the action of keeping people charged whilst on the go. So, like I mentioned, the combination of my experiences at various employers are the reason why I was able to somehow almost serendipitously now celebrate my year having joined ChargedUp in April of 2019. Here's what the concept actually looks like now. So this is a station on a pub countertop. Essentially, again, it's literally a toaster. It's tiny, and it contains up to 10 power banks at any point in time. But obviously, there's a rent and return concept, just like the Boris bikes in London. So anytime you rent and return, there's that constant need for redistribution across the network, and that's something we're looking into later. However, way back when I first joined, it was all about the basics. It was just, let's get stations out there. It's kind of a land grab type of business where you want to make sure that there's enough of a ubiquitous nature to the system that then a user can feel confident that they can rent here and return it somewhere else in a few hours, even if they've walked a few kilometers away or taken a bus or even traversed zones across London. So here's, if nothing else, this is the concept. Essentially, the key barrier to entry still is the fact that you do indeed need to download an app. And I think for some people that is always the first question is, well, if my phone's dead, how do you expect me to download an app? For now, that is still the one key thing where you might need 5% left in your phone battery in order to download the app. From there, once you go through a basic onboarding, you are able to scan the QR, power bank comes out, you plug in, and you're sorted. But essentially, yes, there is that kind of initial barrier of if your phone's completely dead, unfortunately, we're not quite yet the solution for you, but maybe coming soon. We'll see. I've stipulated a few more details at the bottom of the slide for anyone curious, but essentially we do have a few different pricing options, as well as the fact that now we're in over 2,500 locations. So again, when I joined 300, now we're really close to 3,000 in just over the course of a year. And it's been an incredible journey that I'm really happy to share with you because it's had some interesting bumps along the road. First, the fact that right around when I joined, about a month later, we rebranded. Obviously, you can imagine that from a tangible standpoint, all the marketing collateral, the stickers on each of the power banks, I actually have 2 here so that I can show you the difference. Ta-da and ta-da, respectively. Not super dramatically different, and yet they are. I'll explain why. As shown in the graphic, there used to be different types of cables set up with the power bank. Now it's a more streamlined approach. But all in all, when I joined, everything had been done in a kind of an MVP environment, both with the setup of the network and the scaling of growth in London, but also the fact that the apps had been done by an offshore agency and kind of done in an MVP style approach. So very much functional, but not necessarily having thought through the implications of scaling, whether that's to, far more venues and therefore far more user growth, but also complexity around going international, for example, and having to be a multilingual service or supporting different types of payment methods, let alone the interesting vision that was the reason why I joined ChargedUp in the first place regarding, how much can we actually get away with doing some really interesting brand partnerships? And can we actually consider perhaps a telco partnership further down the line? Because by being able to be attached to an existing network of customers from a specific telco, suddenly that gives people that much more of a sense of who we are and what we do, and they'll actually want to use the service. It's a nice halo effect, of course, and me coming from a telco background, that was music to my ears to know that it would be a perk from a retention standpoint for the telco and for us to constantly be exposed to an audience that might not come across the brand if they don't happen to see us on a specific pub, countertop, etc. So as a result, it's pretty epic that we've actually, over the course of a year, not to toot my own horn, it's a team effort, really built out every aspect of the technology, whether that's the apps or actually the entire architecture and even the operational dashboard for it to support this type of scale and growth. And in addition, the stations themselves. So this is a pretty transformative year for ChargedUp because we went from just having the little toaster that you can see at the bottom there with a now endearing 10 batteries, but we've also now launched venues with a giant, 6 to 7 foot tall vending machine looking thing that actually contains 40. So the ability to have a touch screen experience, really eye-catching, really straightforward onboarding for someone like my mom to feel comfortable with browsing through the touch screen, downloading the app, onboarding very quickly, and being able to release a power bank at Westfield, for example, with the 2 different shopping centers in London is pretty incredible. And at the same time, a testament to our adaptability is the fact that as we went through the journey of hiring a contractor specifically to build out this large station kiosk functionality and interface with the new apps and the infrastructure, we realized that that's a really great product to be able to have, but it's not the easiest to set up. Obviously, you can imagine that the hardware is super heavy. It's challenging with Ethernet connectivity, etc. So we've actually already, as you can see in that kind of far right image, done essentially a combination. The benefit of having a really large container, essentially, that's eye-catching, branded, takes up a decent amount of space and can hold up to either 20 or 40 batteries, depending on if it's double-sided or not. But essentially, it's just leveraging the old school toaster thing. So it doesn't have a touch screen. It's nowhere nearly as fancy, but it gets the job done. And that, I think, is, if nothing else that you can take away from the presentation, the fact that we've always been able to start to take on board user feedback, venue feedback, operations team feedback, and figuring out, interesting ways that the tech can either automate and streamline, or that the hardware itself can actually, serve double duty of keeping things simple operationally, as well as ensuring that people would still be able to see that if they came across it in, a giant hallway of a big venue, instead of only relying on the expensive and complex solution of the large station. This is what our dashboard used to look like. So it was very rudimentary, it was, branded and cute, but a lot of the functionality behind it was overly assuming that the network would stay small and that we wouldn't have that many users. Moreover, we were relying on Mixpanel for our analytics, which was fine. It served its purpose, but it had a few limitations that we weren't quite sure could scale up to fit our needs. And also, we rely on kind of a SIM card monitoring dashboard in order to ensure that we know the connectivity of each of the stations, which are the ones that ping back and forth to the network when you've rented and returned. Lots of rudimentary stuff that, again, was really great to get us up and running, but we knew we needed to reinvent ourselves. Similarly, you can see that the board that I'd set up on Monday.com used to be set up for June and thinking ahead to Q3 and Q4. Way back when, nearly a year ago now. And similarly, there's a Figma space there for what used to be the UI of the iOS app and the various different incarnations of button styling and things that looked nice, but weren't necessarily super accessible. There was a lot of issues with fonts being too small, color contrast not necessarily being there, that someone like my dad that can't really distinguish between green and gray would actually really struggle to see if something's an enabled or a disabled state. And even just some of the copy where we were giving you really important information through your onboarding journey. If you can't read with that type of contrast, you genuinely probably wouldn't be able to comfortably use the service, which I think were some major things I knew we needed to address. So I'll give you the Coles notes of the past year. When I first joined ChargedUp, I first had to understand how each person, just like at Boiler Room, is essentially a department. Nobody had anyone to delegate to. When you talk to the head of X, that was them. A few of them had an intern or two that they could rely on, but essentially it was people collaborating in a tiny WhatsApp group, which was pretty crazy given the amount of success that they'd already had with raising some investment, getting into Founders Factory, and a few other interesting programs that gave us a lot of exposure. But thankfully, one of the first things we accomplished was hiring a phenomenal CTO with over a dozen years of consulting experience in a variety of not only industries, but continents. And so he's been through a ton. He's got the battle scars to prove it, and therefore has a lot of experience that he can bring to the table of constantly being more of almost a devil's advocate, saying, have we thought about, this, and this? What are the risks that we might be blind to? What are the blind spots here? And how can we mitigate them from the get-go and really ensure that we're scaling or that we're thinking about things smarter, not just harder? So if nothing else, it's been incredible to have him as kind of the technical co-pilot to a lot of decisions that I would have no idea how to handle. And he happens to be hilarious too, which is pretty great. So the first key thing that really put our apps to the test, and actually the entire ecosystem, was when we were asked, how quickly could we spin up something in the Netherlands and set up a few stations there with kind of a partner style relationship. We looked at the app and figured, well, it wouldn't be too tricky to, start to splinter off the experience from assuming that everyone is in the United Kingdom and has a +44 mobile code, to doing a bit of the detection of, if you happen to be in the Netherlands, let's customize your experience a bit and ensure that not only do we treat you properly through the onboarding and the sending you an SMS to your mobile number, but also that your payment method comes through with euros, etc. That was the first real challenge, and when we actually realized we're probably going to have to rebuild the apps to ensure that we can move things in a much quicker way and build them out already thinking ahead, 2 or 3 steps down the road, at least for another year or 2 of growth, and thinking about the roadmap that our business development guys were putting together. Separately, just like I mentioned right around when I was being interviewed, I knew that there was already that potential for an O2 partnership, and sure enough, it happened. So somehow we were able to get something put together with the tech team, still just repurposing those apps in order to support an O2 partnership, whereby if you were an O2 mobile subscriber, if you had the Priority app, which is the app that O2 has created to kind of showcase a lot of deals from a loyalty and retention standpoint, whether that's a cheaper pizza with Pizza Express or a free iced coffee from Cafe Nero once a week, we were offered the opportunity to be one of those showcased offers. And again, that kind of harkened back to my past life being the go-to-market liaison at TELUS, because we had a really similar telco strategy about what kind of deals can we offer to retain our existing base, or even actually acquire some new users that might want to switch from another telco provider and actually come on board with us because of the perks we offer. So with ChargedUp, we were given the challenge of providing a 1 hour per day free rental for people that met the 2 conditions of O2 and Priority app. And again, that was pretty incredible to somehow pull off with our then very tiny junior in-house team, struggling to figure out how the code base had been set up and what things we would need to do going forward to support multiple scalable telco partnerships. As I alluded to before, the large station deal with Westfield was really the impetus for us making sure that we would build the app for the large station in such a way that it was as automated as possible, operationally simple rather than having to deal with a lot of back and forth, and that we were actually able to support a really seamless experience for users instead of anything confusing. That was its own beast, kind of happening in parallel to the fact that we figured we needed to redesign the apps. But that, in culmination with a really exciting partnership that we got with Jägermeister, was what really made us hit the ground running almost at the same time as back to school in September. That's a Jägermeister partnership. So it was specific to the German network initially, which we hadn't built out at all. And actually the partnership entails that Jaeger salespeople themselves are the ones that are kind of helping us break into that market by tapping into several venues out there based on their existing relationships. But some of the demands that we realized we needed to bake into the apps and the entire operational dashboard as well were, again, everything to do with internationalization and localizing to the German market, obviously in language being a key element to ensure that English wouldn't be a barrier, as well as fully supporting telco and brand partnerships out there and having them be either mutually exclusive or stackable. And on top of that, really ensuring that the technology was scalable and reliable, regardless of suddenly potentially doubling the network in a very short amount of time, now that we were going to be in many different markets simultaneously. So as a result, in October, we brought forth a 1-month contract. Her name's Joanna. She was phenomenal at actually being able to do tons of user research, both with our existing base, as well as really understanding prospective customer segments that we might be a bit oblivious to. In our infancy, ChargedUp was very much about, targeting the young crowd that goes out to pubs and bars, nights and weekends. And instead we knew that the Westfield demographic is almost the polar opposite of that in every way. So we really wanted to ensure that we were doing research to minimize any form of friction and that the product was as understandable as possible with, not just the UX and the UI, but everything to do with our marketing collateral, with our intercom customer care support, and the type of language that we use to really simplify the concept for people. There were a few other strategy implications, but I won't dive into the details here. Overall, in December, it was pretty phenomenal to kick into the year, actually ahead of 2020, as the large station needed to be ready for Christmas shoppers mid-December, completely revamping the apps and catering to the large station as the new concept that we knew we wanted to really support. So we first set up Westfield White City, and in January, we went into Stratford as well. Pretty incredible stuff in a very short amount of time. Furthermore, in 2020, we were able to actually launch in Germany with the support of Jägermeister, including all of the tooling to let their salespeople go out with an iPad, set up a venue within minutes, and have it show up on the app right away. It was pretty incredible stuff, given that our team is tiny and that in a lot of ways it was very much how do we make it up as we go along to ensure that it will actually be a robust, reliable solution for venues to get convinced that, hey, this is a really great service that I can offer to my venue, and sure enough, for users to start to adopt it quickly. A couple weeks ago, again, that kind of large station equivalent, which we call the medium station, was set up with toasters inside it. And meanwhile, operationally, we now refer to those as child stations inside a medium station, letting our operations team very nimbly adjust and monitor the status of those stations as well. Our current focus, even though we're on lockdown, is now to really revamp the UX and UI that was done in a hurry back in autumn. But let's take the lessons that we learned through the user research done in October and actually now infuse the brand as well. So rather than just putting something together quickly, let's ensure that the whimsy and tone of the ChargedUp brand that you're starting to see in our social media, if you've poked around any of that stuff, that should come across in the app as well, while also really boosting the accessibility to ensure that anyone and everyone, so long as they've got a tiny bit of battery life left, can support it. Here's a few visuals of the stuff that I was talking about. So for example, the priority deal used to get a splash screen. We're now in the process of redesigning it so that it's even more infused into the generic app experience. But essentially, again, it's a really big pride point to have supported this initial telco back when the apps were still on the old code base. Now that we've built out a more scalable solution, it'll be fairly straightforward for us to use it in a modular fashion. Separately, this was the ever-changing prototype that our researcher, Joanna, in October was able to put together, constantly testing the copy that we used, the graphics, the button styling, whether you'd be able to skip onboarding or if it was forced upon you to gauge how much people would actually understand what the concept was, and the fact that indeed you do need to actually pull out the cable from a power bank instead of just assuming that it's kind of a contactless experience, etc. So there's a lot that I could dig into here, but overall, the brag point, I think, is that we've constantly tried to optimize the experience and learn every step of the way, validating as we go along, and very nimbly doing so as a startup. If, the concept of my presentation was supposed to be about scaling, it's interesting, I think, to point out that we didn't actually scale the team. We simply hired a few contractors. And I think that's something that can sometimes be talked about disparagingly, because people say, your contractors are just going to come in, do stuff, and then walk away and not support you in the future. That might be, but I think we really lucked out with some incredible individuals that literally joined the team, and within a week it felt like they were a true part of the team, as if they cared about what the business is going to do in 3 or 5 years. And a lot of that was due to the clarity that we had in the strategy of what needed to get done by when, as well as what our overall long-term goals are. As a result, the contractors that we brought on for 3 months initially were very naturally extended to ensure that we would continue those projects, not just at the V1 or V2, but that we would constantly be able to iterate as we went along. And so sure enough, it's been pretty amazing to have some contractors on our team for a little while now, and we've had to sunset as a result of IR35 especially. But regardless, it was very much a project. We knew that we needed to launch everything in time for mid-December, and then we had the luxury in Q1 of doing a few iterations to support the Jaeger deal, but we actually were very confident that by end of March, as sure enough happened, we were actually going to be in a good place. And obviously it's poignant to give this presentation now because, especially with lockdown, it makes sense that we'll have a really tiny team and go back to basics of just the bare bones of one individual per platform that is a permanent hire, just to keep things going and to build out a few features along the way. But we don't foresee any big spikes because we're not going to rebuild the apps from scratch again anytime soon. They've been done properly, everything's been thought about in a scalable way that now we can much more comfortably take a more leisurely approach to our roadmap instead of the insane amount of effort that's condensed here into a single slide. Briefly, I'll show you that the fact that, again, the flows from a user experience standpoint, a bit clunky at times, frequently changing styles. You can see that there's an interstitial there, kind of a third of the way into the slide, that doesn't follow the same styling conventions at all because it was literally just carried over from before. But it got the job done, and we still saw user growth in every way. not necessarily measured in terms of revenue, because I don't like to think in those terms. The fact that someone needs a phone rental for 3 hours instead of just one is very much a them metric instead of ours. But the ability to see engagement and conversion, as well as return users, our app reviews suddenly, becoming amazing, all of that is a testament to how much we've tried to listen to user feedback, including what comes through our intercom team on a customer care basis. And they're, a live chat 24/7 team that constantly gets to talk to users when they're feeling frustrated, when something's not working right. We take those data points and really try to infuse that into the experience. As a result, we actually brought back a feature that we'd initially descoped because people genuinely asked for it. Not quite as much as we might have thought. I think there was a misconception that, sure enough, people really want to buy the batteries. Not as much, but there are a few people that do. And as a result, we really wanted to facilitate that purchase, because once you buy a power bank from us, it's not necessarily that this is your power bank. It's the fact that when it dies, you can put it back into a station. And as I've landed there in the pricing menu, we then recognize that you have a swap enabled. So you can easily see yourself going, pop this into a station, this one comes out, walk away with a freshly charged power bank. It's not so much about the one you've purchased, it's the fact that you suddenly have access to endlessly at rent and return no matter where you are in the network, which now includes obviously the UK as well as Germany. Here's the in situ concept of the Westfield large stations. It's kind of baffling now to be able to just go to a shopping center and see this giant beast that I know only came about a couple of months ago. And again, it's a really big pride point for us to know that we're keeping London going. We've had amazing reviews and comments of moms saying, my phone was dying and I wasn't sure if I could get a hold of my child to know when to pick them up from school or an activity or something. And keeping connected is super crucial, especially when you have a long day traversing the city. So we feel really, really proud to actually be not just for, again, kind of that nightlife weekend community, but also for everyone else that might come across our stations. And then just a really high-level overview of everything to do with Germany. That's a lot of stations that got sent over to that market and that very quickly have started to pop up across the German market. Obviously, lockdown has meant that the sales efforts of getting the venues activated has come to a bit of a halt, but the fact that within weeks they were able to do so themselves as a third-party kind of sales force, again, just with an iPad interaction that dynamically connected into our operational dashboard, and that gives users the ability to go into an in-app activation and redeem a free shot of Jägermeister, is pretty incredible, given that we kind of just put it together based on, we think that we can do it, let's see if we can hit the timeline, and somehow we did. Again, courtesy of some pretty incredible contractors that have been able to pull off some amazing miracles. So again, just to touch on the medium station, not everything is tech. A lot of the scaling challenges at a startup aren't necessarily technological. They're more about how do we ensure that we're doing the right thing depending on the context. And so here's the prime example on the left of the initial prototype for how do we suddenly leverage our existing little toaster model into a container of sorts. And then going forward, the tech aspect was how do we then ensure that from an app standpoint, it's a single QR code as opposed to you having to go through in this initial rendering 4 different QRs depending on each of the stations, and obviously the operational complexity and potential confusion that might have caused. Endless iterations is kind of the name of the game here. I'm very lucky now to also have had the opportunity to work with, again, a short-term contractor, happened to be based out of Manchester, so only visited the office, I think, 3 times in total over the course of 2 months. But he's completely revamped our entire pattern library and our styles to make sure everything's as accessible as possible. And that really just makes sense, that it's like a nice intuitive UX UI, that the colors pop and I give you just as much context as you might need, and also that the wording that we use and that the conventions of different user flows make sense rather than pain points along the way. Simultaneously, some of the marketing collateral has been revamped as well, not just to infuse the Jaeger branding, but to really make it clear to people that we are actually now fairly ubiquitous, not just with bars, but with the O2 partnership with Westfield, and that kind of more dynamic approach to scaling our startup, not just in London, but across the UK and now across Europe as well. Finally, the refreshment of the product wasn't just for the apps, but also for that touchscreen experience in Westfield. I could go into tons of detail of the nuances that have been done with improving this experience, but a lot of it is how does an experience that's in a glossy kind of reflective surface that's a very blue light in the background especially when seen from afar, you might not actually be able to see or make out what that says. And especially when you're up close, the color contrast, again, might actually not be as punchy as it might look like on a Figma or a sketch file. So again, kudos to Matt, our designer, for really thinking through everything with regards to even just that top section that says red power bank in that deep navy blue that's in our color palette, to ensure that you can actually see that ahead of anything else. That will be kind of that moth to the flame dynamic, that if you're way far away in a shopping center, you might actually still be able to see it and know that that's where one of the stations are. Typically, you'll be doing it with the map open in the app, but if you're not an existing user, this is how we figured we'd be able to much more clearly bring forth that initial advertising aspect. And then furthermore, once you're actually at the stations, having a really clear proposition of rent and return, with the primary call to action being rent, so that it's crystal clear and there's no accidental confusion there. I can't show you the operational dashboards ins and outs. That would give away far too much for a very diverse audience that might be tuning in. But this is just to show you the amount of, the bounty of features that our developer has been able to put together, including everything to do with managing our promo codes, managing the various in-app campaigns that we've set up, both with the telcos as well as with other brands, and our green energy partner, Octopus Energy, because the power banks happen to leverage green energy. And every time you rent one, you're using green energy instead of just being plugged into a wall socket. All that stuff now gets configured here. And I could easily today go in and create a new campaign, put in a new asset, a new URL, and dynamically deploy that into a really specific subset of the network, as well as leverage a lot of our analytics with Firebase, talk directly to our intercom team and get them set up with maybe some template answers for the basics, as opposed to when they get to be more conversational to support our users. And all in all, again, this was done very much with the intent of how do we scale as comfortably as possible, using reliable technology and really being clever about how we can best leverage the data that we've got, or the ideas that we'd like to first validate in market. Final slide, I promise. I did want to bring about kind of an unsolicited, not sponsored hat at all, but I actually did an interview for Clubhouse back when I was at Boiler Room, and I have brought forth the tool into our team at ChargedUp now, and especially now that they have dark mode, which I really enjoy. Looks like I work in a spaceship instead of on a product team. But essentially, I think it's crucial as you scale to really have the right tools in place. We all know about Slack and channels and being able to have conversations specific to a team and to a project, as well as various conferencing tools, but I genuinely believe that the most important aspect is actually having a one-stop shop for not just a tech team and the different work streams involved, but being able to view at an epic level, or perhaps, what are the key things that as a business we're trying to achieve. If you use objectives and key results, having some kind of OKR infused aspect to what you do, and to really be able to keep track of what you're achieving, when, and why, because hopefully that'll mean that when you have monthly sync ups as a management team, or retrospectives on a fortnightly basis with your tech team, you're able to much more nimbly adjust to changes either in the market or in the team, with a team structure shift in terms of maybe we're thinking more operationally now, or maybe we're going to talk more to venues, and how do we ensure that the tech team is working on the right thing at the right time in order to continue to expand to different markets, whether that's different countries or different user segments with different partnerships. Between that and the fact that I do happen to send still some old school emails, doing monthly recaps here and there hopefully means that the team is always able to even just search in their inbox for, oh yeah, what was the stuff that they launched back in February that might impact me, or what's the coming soon part of that email, so that I can know what features are probably coming down the pipe from a roadmap standpoint, as well as, do I actually need the team to do something and maybe it's not being worked on yet? So hopefully there's some proactive and reactive dynamics there. And that's crucial in a startup, because no man is an island. We all need to work together and row the boat in the same direction, combining countless metaphors every step of the way. Hope that is helpful for everyone. And I really appreciate the time that you're taking, especially during lockdown, to watch our journey. Cheers.